The moment Marco Vitali saw those unmistakable dark brown eyes staring back at him from across a crowded elementary school hallway, his entire world stopped spinning. They were his eyes, his father's eyes, his grandmother's eyes, on the face of a 7-year-old boy he had never met. And standing behind that boy, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder, was the woman Marco had loved and lost 8 years ago. The woman he had forced himself to forget. The woman who had vanished from his life without explanation, taking with her a piece of his heart he never recovered. Sophia. And in that single, devastating moment, every lie Marco Vitali had ever told himself came crashing down around him. The kingdom of shadows. They called him the quiet storm, not because Marco Vitali was silent. He spoke when necessary, commanded when required, and made decisions that shaped the lives of hundreds. They called him that because, unlike other men in his position, Marco never raised his voice. He never needed to. When Marco Vitali walked into a room, the temperature dropped. Conversations died. Strong men suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. At 42 years old, Marco controlled half the shipping operations along the eastern coast. His organization moved things, legitimate cargo mostly, machinery, electronics, automotive parts, but woven between those legitimate shipments were other things. Things that made certain people very wealthy and kept local politicians looking the other way. Marco had built his empire methodically, carefully, and ruthlessly. He'd inherited the foundation from his father, expanded it beyond his father's wildest dreams, and crushed anyone who stood in his way. Not with violence, though violence was occasionally necessary, but with strategy, with patience, with the cold, calculating precision of a chess grandmaster who could see 15 moves ahead. His penthouse overlooked the city like a throne room in the clouds. Marble floors, original artwork, a wine collection worth more than most people's homes, and silence, always the oppressive weight of silence. Marco ate his dinners alone at a table designed for 12. He slept in a bed large enough for 4, always on the same side, reaching for nothing. His phone rang constantly with business, deals, disputes, demands. But it never rang with friendship. It never rang with love. His wife, Juliana, had died 4 years ago. Cancer. The cruelest irony was that Marco Vitali, a man who could make problems disappear with a single phone call, had been powerless to save her. He'd flown in specialists from 3 continents. He'd funded experimental treatments. He'd offered God himself whatever bargain he wanted. None of it mattered. Juliana died on a Tuesday afternoon in October, holding Marco's hand, and took with her the last warmth he had left. Now there was only Elena, his daughter, his 8-year-old miracle, the only person in the world who could make Marco Vitali smile. The only one who saw behind the mask to the man underneath. A man who made silly voices while reading bedtime stories, who attempted and failed at braiding hair, who kept a drawer full of her drawings in his desk at work. For Elena, Marco would do anything, which is why, on this particular Thursday morning, he found himself standing in the hallway of St. Catherine's Academy, surrounded by chattering children and helicopter parents, feeling more exposed than he ever did in any boardroom or backroom negotiation. "Daddy, you're supposed to come to the classroom," Elena said, tugging his hand. "Miss Patterson is showing everyone the science fair projects." Marco allowed himself to be pulled through the crowd, his security team maintaining a discreet distance. He hated these events, the forced small talk, the curious stares, the whispered questions about what Elena's father actually did for a living. But Elena had specifically asked him to come. She'd made him promise. And Marco Vitali kept his promises to his daughter. They turned the corner toward the third-grade wing. And that's when he saw her. 8 years ago. Before Juliana, there was Sofia. Marco met her when he was 34 and she was 26. She was a literature professor at the university. Brilliant, passionate, completely unimpressed by his money or his reputation. She'd laughed at his attempts to impress her, called him corporate mafia as a joke, not knowing how close to the truth she was. For 6 months, Sofia made Marco feel like a different person, someone capable of normal happiness, someone who could walk away from his world and start fresh. He'd actually considered it, leaving everything behind, signing over his operations to his lieutenants and disappearing with her to some coastal town in Portugal where nobody knew his name. Then reality intervened. His father's old enemies resurfaced. A bloody territorial dispute threatened everything Marco had built. And one night, after a near-miss assassination attempt, Marco realized the truth. He could never escape his life, and anyone close to him would always be in danger. So he did what he thought was the noble thing. He pushed Sofia away. Not gently, he couldn't afford to be gentle. He was cruel. He said things designed to make her hate him. He told her she was a distraction, an amusement, nothing more. He watched her face crumble and told himself it was for her own good. Sofia left Chicago that night, changed her phone number, quit her job, vanished completely. Marco told himself he was protecting her. He told himself he didn't love her. He told himself those lies for 8 years. The collision. She looked older now, softer. There were strands of silver threading through her dark hair, and the fire that once blazed in her eyes had mellowed into something deeper, wisdom, perhaps, or resignation. But she was still Sofia, still the woman whose name he sometimes murmured in his sleep, still the ghost who haunted every quiet moment. Their eyes met across the crowded hallway. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then Marco's gaze dropped to the boy standing beside her. 7 years old, maybe 8. Dark curly hair, olive skin, and those eyes, God, those eyes, identical to the ones Marco saw in the mirror every morning. The mathematics hit him like a physical blow. 8 years since Sofia left. 7-year-old boy. Marco's knees actually weakened. The great and feared Marco Vitali, who had stared down enemies and made billion-dollar decisions without flinching, felt his legs nearly give out in an elementary school hallway. "Daddy!" Elena's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Sofia's face had gone pale. She pulled the boy closer, her hand gripping his shoulder. There was fear in her eyes, real, genuine fear. "Marco," she whispered. The boy looked up at his mother, confused. "Mom? Do you know that man?" Somewhere in the chaos of Marco's thoughts, he registered the absurdity. His son, was asking if Sofia knew the stranger who happened to be his father. "Elena," Marco heard himself say, his voice remarkably steady. "Go to your classroom. I'll be there in a moment." "But, please, sweetheart." Elena hesitated, looking between her father and the pale woman with the boy. Something in her 8-year-old intuition sensed the gravity of the moment. She nodded slowly and walked away, glancing back twice before disappearing into a classroom. Marco took a step toward Sofia. She took a step back. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not here. Not now." "Is he?" Marco couldn't finish the sentence. His voice broke on the words. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. His name is Matteo, she finally said. He's in 2nd grade. He loves dinosaurs and soccer and building things with his hands. Her voice cracked. He asks about his father sometimes. I never know what to tell him. Marco felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that had been locked away for nearly a decade. You knew, he said. When you left. You knew you were pregnant. I found out 2 weeks after. A tear slipped down her cheek. I came back to tell you. I stood outside your building for an hour. And then I saw you on the news. Some business deal. You were shaking hands with men I knew were dangerous. And I realized. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I realized I couldn't bring a child into your world. That wasn't your decision to make alone. No, she agreed. It wasn't. And I've lived with that guilt every single day. She looked at her son, their son, who was watching this exchange with obvious confusion. But I'd do it again, Marco. To keep him safe. The hallway was emptying. Parents and children filtering into classrooms. Soon they would be alone, standing in this impossible moment. I need to talk to you, Marco said. Privately. Please. Sophia hesitated. Then she knelt down to Matteo's level. Baby, this is an old friend of Mommy's. I need to talk to him for a few minutes. Can you go to your classroom and tell Mrs. Rodriguez I'll be a little late? Matteo looked at Marco with undisguised curiosity. There was no fear in his eyes, just the open, wondering gaze of a child trying to understand the adult world. Are you really my mom's friend? He asked Marco. Marco's throat tightened. I was. A long time ago. The boy considered this. Then he shrugged, the easy acceptance of childhood, and walked down the hallway toward his classroom. Marco watched him go, cataloging every detail. The way he walked, the slight bounce in his step, the way he adjusted his backpack strap exactly the way Marco had adjusted his own as a child. His son. He had a son. Truth and consequences. They found an empty music room at the end of the hall. Sophia stood by the window, arms crossed, keeping her distance. How did you end up here? Marco asked. Chicago. This school. I moved back 2 years ago. My mother was sick. I didn't know. She laughed bitterly. I didn't know your daughter went here. How would I? I thought you'd never have children. You always said you didn't want them. Marco remembered. He'd said those words to Sophia 8 years ago. Another lie he'd told to protect her from his world. Juliana wanted children, he said quietly. She changed my mind. And then she got sick, and Elena became. He trailed off. Elena became everything. I'm sorry. About your wife. I heard. Silence stretched between them. Matteo, Marco said, tasting the name for the first time. Does he know anything? He knows his father left before he was born. He knows I loved his father once. Sophia's voice hardened. He doesn't know his father is a criminal. I'm a businessman. Don't. Sophia turned to face him, anger finally breaking through her composure. Don't insult me with that lie. I spent months after I left you researching, reading, understanding. I know exactly what you are, Marco. I know about the shipping operations, the connections, the families you've destroyed. You think I haven't followed your career? You think I haven't made sure you were never, ever able to find us? Her words hit harder than any bullet. You moved constantly, Marco said. changed addresses, changed schools. I thought. He stopped. I tried to find you. After Juliana died, I needed to know you were okay. But you disappeared completely. That was the point. Sophia's eyes were wet again. I loved you, Marco. God help me. I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone. And walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I saw what your world does to people. I saw the bodyguards and the security measures and the constant fear. I couldn't raise my son in that. Our son. My son. She stepped closer, her voice low and fierce. I changed his diapers. I stayed up with him through fevers. I worked 2 jobs to pay for his school. I held him when he cried about not having a father. He is my son. You don't get to claim him now. Marco felt the words like blows. Each one deserved. You're right, he said quietly. Sophia blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. You're right, Marco repeated. I have no claim, no right. I wasn't there. I chose my world over you, and you made the only choice you could make to protect him. He took a deep breath. But Sophia, I'm here now, and I'm looking at you, and I'm asking, no, I'm begging, for a chance. A chance for what? To know him, to be something, anything, even if it's just someone who shows up at his soccer games, someone who helps with homework sometimes, someone who, his voice broke again, someone who doesn't miss anymore. Sophia stared at him for a long moment. You're still in that life. I am. Then my answer is no. She moved toward the door. Marco stepped into her path. Not threatening, just desperate. What if I wasn't? Sophia froze. What? What if I walked away? From all of it? What if I gave it up? You can't. Men in your position don't just retire. We both know that. They do sometimes. With the right planning, the right handoffs. Marco's mind was already racing through possibilities. Luciano could take over operations. The legitimate businesses could be expanded, the shadier elements slowly dismantled. It would take time. A year, maybe 2. But it was possible. For the first time in his life, Marco wanted something more than power. He wanted his son. If I could prove to you that I'm out, he said carefully, would you give me a chance? Not as a father, I know I haven't earned that, but as someone who wants to try. Sophia's face showed a war of emotions. Hope battling against years of fear. Love wrestling with self-preservation. Why should I believe you? Because I'm telling you the truth. Marco met her eyes. I've never lied to you, Sophia. I've kept things from you. I pushed you away. But I never lied about how I felt. I never lied about who I was. I'm telling you now, I will give up everything, for a chance to know my son. The choice. 3 months later, Marco sat in a lawyer's office, signing documents that transferred controlling interest in his operations to a consortium of his most trusted people. The legitimate businesses, real estate, shipping, logistics, import companies remained his. The rest, the shadow empire his father had built and Marco had expanded, belonged to someone else now. Luciano, his oldest associate, had looked at Marco like he'd lost his mind. For what? He demanded. For a woman? For a kid you just met? For a chance to be someone else? Marco had replied. The transition wasn't easy. There were threats, suspicions, former allies who became potential enemies overnight. Marco's security team worked overtime, and there were several tense weeks when he genuinely feared for his life. But he pushed through. For Matteo, for Elena, for the possibility of a family he'd never known he wanted. Sophia watched it all happen from a careful distance. She allowed supervised visits, an hour here, a lunch there. Always in public places. Always with her nearby. Matteo was curious about this new presence in his life. He asked questions constantly. Why did Marco have so many serious-looking friends? Why did he drive such a fancy car? Did he know any astronauts? Marco answered every question honestly, or as honestly as he could. I was in business for a long time. Made a lot of money. Now I'm taking a break. Why? Because I found out I have a son, and I want to spend time getting to know him. Matteo had considered this for a long moment. Then, do you like dinosaurs? I'm learning to. Meanwhile, Elena discovered she had a brother. The news delighted her in ways Marco hadn't anticipated. She'd always wanted a sibling. She took Matteo under her wing immediately, teaching him the secret codes she used with her friends, sharing her favorite books, defending him fiercely against anyone who looked at him sideways, watching his two children together, playing, arguing, laughing. Marco felt something he thought had died with Juliana. Hope, the reckoning. But freedom always has a price. 8 months into his new life, Marco received a phone call. Someone's been asking questions about your family. Luciano's voice was tense. About the schools your kids attend. Their schedules. Security gaps. Marco's blood turned to ice. Who? Can't confirm yet, but it looks like someone from the old network. Someone who didn't appreciate being pushed out during the transition. For 3 days, Marco lived in a state of controlled terror. He pulled Elena from school. He warned Sophia, who immediately took Matteo and disappeared to her sister's house upstate. And then, on the 4th night, they came. Not for Marco. For Sophia. Marco's security team intercepted them half a mile from the house. 3 men in a black SUV with very specific instructions. They'd been paid to deliver a message. To remind Marco that leaving the life didn't mean the life left you. The men were dealt with, quietly, without violence where possible. But the message was clear. Marco's past would always be a threat to his future. He drove upstate that night. Sophia was awake when he arrived, standing in the doorway of her sister's farmhouse, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. They found us, she said. Not a question. My people stopped them. Everyone's safe. For now. She looked at him with the same fear he'd seen in her eyes 8 years ago, in that school hallway. This is what I was afraid of, Marco. This is why I ran. I know. I can't live like this. I can't raise him looking over my shoulder. You won't have to. Marco took a step closer. I'm going to fix this. Permanently. How? There are people who owe me favors. Powerful people. The kind who can make problems disappear without violence. I've spent 2 decades building relationships, and I've never called in those debts. I'm calling them in now. Sophia searched his face. And then what? And then we leave. All of us. Elena, Matteo, you and me. I have resources in places no one knows about. A new name, a new life. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe. You're asking me to trust you with everything. I'm asking you to let me protect my family. It was the first time he'd used that word. Family. It hung in the cold air between them. Matteo asks about you, Sophia said quietly. When you're not there. He asks when he can see his dad again. A tear slipped down her cheek. He calls you Dad, Marco. When you're not around to hear it. Marco's throat closed completely. He couldn't speak. I've spent 8 years protecting him from you, Sophia continued. And now I watch him with you and I see the father I always wished you could be. The man I fell in love with. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. If you can really do this, if you can really make us safe, then yes. I'll trust you. I'll go wherever you take us. Her voice broke. Just promise me you won't disappear again. Promise me you won't push us away. Marco took her face in his hands, gently, reverently. I spent 10 years building an empire, he said. I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning your trust. And I will never, ever let you go again. 2 years later, the beach house sat on a quiet stretch of coastline in Portugal, a small fishing village where nobody knew or cared about Marco Vitali's history. The locals knew him as Marcus, the Italian businessman who'd retired early, the one with the beautiful wife and the 2 kids who were always running and laughing along the shore. Elena was 10 now, tanned and confident, ruling the neighborhood children with the same natural authority her father had once commanded in boardrooms. Matteo was 9, still obsessed with dinosaurs but also showing a talent for chess that made Marco unreasonably proud. And Sophia. Sophia woke up every morning in Marco's arms, her hair silver-streaked and beautiful, her eyes no longer carrying the weight of fear. They'd married quietly, 6 months after arriving. Just the 4 of them and a local priest. Matteo had served as ring-bearer. Elena had insisted on being the flower woman, not flower girl, Daddy, because I'm too old for girl. On this particular evening, Marco sat on the back porch, watching the sun sink into the Atlantic. Matteo was at the table behind him, setting up a chessboard. Dad! The word still sent a warm shiver through Marco's chest. Yes, son? Why did you wait so long to find us? Marco turned around. Matteo was looking at him with those dark brown eyes. His eyes, his father's eyes, generations of Vitalis looking out at him. It was a question Matteo had asked before in different ways. Marco always answered honestly. I didn't know you existed until I saw you in that school hallway. But before that, why did you make Mom leave? Marco considered his answer carefully. He always did. I thought I was protecting her. I thought my life was too dangerous, too complicated. I thought if I pushed her away, she would be safer. He paused. I was wrong. And being wrong cost me 8 years with you and your mother. Matteo processed this. Are you still dangerous? No. That part of my life is over. Good. Matteo moved a chess piece. Your turn. I'm going to beat you tonight. You've said that before. Tonight I mean it. Marco laughed. A real laugh, the kind that had once been so rare, and turned back to the chessboard. Behind him, through the kitchen window, he could hear Sophia humming while she cooked. Elena was helping, probably creating more mess than food. The smell of something wonderful drifted out onto the porch. Somewhere in the world, the empire Marco had built continued to operate. Men made decisions, moved shipments, conducted business. It had nothing to do with him anymore. That life belonged to someone else entirely. Here, in this quiet place, Marco Vitali was just a husband, a father, a man who had found his way back from the darkness by following the light of his children's eyes. He reached across the chessboard and moved his knight. Your turn, Matteo. His son grinned, that same mischievous grin Marco saw in his own baby photos, and leaned forward to study the board. The sun finished setting. The first stars appeared. And Marco Vitali, the man they once called the Quiet Storm, sat in perfect peace, finally home.